Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be using some products from Picket Fence, and I'm using the Graceful Koi and the Add Color to Your Life, which is a rainbow set, but we're not going to use it that way today because I'm all about stretching your stamps. So first things first, before we get all the way into the card making, just something of note. If you're watching this on 4th of July weekend, Picket Fence is having a 20% off sale that will be linked below if you're interested, as well as a link to my blog with a whole bunch of other crafty sales. So here we're doing a little bit of a Emboss Resist, kind of a trapped Emboss Resist. So you saw me lay my stamp down there. I really love this stamp set and I'm totally going to use it as a rainbow, but I saw these little koi and I thought I could use it as water. And this is just one of those things that, like, I really encourage you to look at your stamps and see what else they can be. So I am putting down some Tumbled glass distress ink. I could have done the lines white, so either used white embossing powder or used a clear over white cardstock, but I really wanted it to just be a hair softer, and so that's why I chose to do the Tumbled glass. You could do this in any color you wanted for whatever images you were using. I am going to go ahead and heat set this. Distress inks stay wet. They're can also be used to be embossed with, so you just need to be careful when using them in a background. Here, this is my clear embossing powder, and all I'm doing is just testing to make sure it doesn't stick where I don't want it and that ink in the background is completely dry. If you skip this step and your ink is still wet, your embossing powder is going to stick to everything. So I would encourage you to make sure that it's completely dry. So I've got my stamp in place now. I could not find my the anti-static tool from the Rabbit Hole Designs, which is my go-to, and so I'm a little sad about that. I have to double check with my child to see where he might have run off with it to. But so I just used my old standby, but I really would have preferred to use the other one. I'm going to ink my stamp up in Versamark ink. This is just a clear sticky ink that's going to hold my embossing powder, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp this down. It's very clearly meant to be a rainbow. You can see that, but because we're going to build this scene around it, by the end of it, I promise you it will not look like a rainbow. And this is just more way, we've talked about this before, like it's just more ways to get more uses out of the stamps that you have by looking at them differently. 2 videos ago, I did a fruit card and several people commented like the watermelon that you colored was meant to be a lemon or a lime slice. You're right, but it sure looked like a watermelon by the time I was done. And so now that's an extra piece of fruit that I had added that I didn't have before. So just try, looking at them a little bit differently and seeing what you can make out of what you have. So here, some tips for heat embossing. I would recommend that you heat your heat gun up first in a safe place. Don't burn your robe like I did. And because it's going to minimize the warping of your paper, another thing that will minimize the warping of your paper is a consistent movement with your heat gun so that you're heating up all of the parts of your paper to the same temperature at the same time. You still may have some warping going on. If that happens, you can put it under like some heavy books or something, or you can kind of bend the paper back real gently back into place. By the time I got done with all of the things that I did to this background, it laid flat and I didn't even have to do anything to it. So here is where the Emboss Resist portion comes in. It's hard to see with the lightest color, which is this tumbled glass, but I need this to blend out into the grassy area. But you can't really see too much of the embossed. This is going to happen, the magic happens as you add the darker colors. And I'm keeping the darker colors more in the center as I want this to look like a bend in, a river or, some body of water, that it looks more like a kind of like a swoop of water with some grasses around it is really our end goal. So the colors I picked intentionally so that they would be darker and you would really see that kind of movement of the water that this stamp brings. That's ultimately what my end goal was to create kind of some movement, and you'll see how I do that with the fish as well. Were there some mistakes made on this card? Yes. If I had to do it over again, would I do them differently? Probably. But I think it's important to share that stuff anyway, because I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. Our cards aren't going to be perfect, but that doesn't mean that they're not beautiful, and it doesn't mean that they're not pretty, and it doesn't mean that they won't bring joy to somebody when you give them away. So just keep that in mind. So here I like to work lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest, just like I do with my Copic markers. I just feel like that gives me a good saturation and a better blend. I did kind of extend this out past the stamping area because, like I said, I need that portion to blend into the grasses that I'm going to be doing to make this a complete scene. Been a long time since we've done a scene card. Just because they are time consuming. I do love them though, and I hope to be able to sneak one in here or there. I'm thinking maybe I have a video that's due on Monday for some fun stuff that's happening, so maybe then. Here, what you saw me do is take a slightly damp baby wipe and just kind of wipe it very gently over the embossed lines. This is just going to clean up any ink that may be sitting on top, so you can really see that lighter area underneath. Another thing that you can do, if you feel like your baby wipe is too wet and it's going to take off too much ink, you can actually go over your inking with the foam from your lightest color, and it will pick up your darker color to make it more clear. You can also kind of buff it with just like a dry paper towel, but it may not remove as much ink as a slightly damp one will. So here we're putting in the quote-unquote grass area. I just chose a couple of greens that I felt like were close to the intensity of the color of the water. So the water was Tumbled Glass, Salty Ocean, Blueprint Sketch, and Chip Sapphire. The grass is going to be Twisted Citron, Mowed Lawn, and Pine Needles. And that's just, again, it would get darker as it moved away from the water. I want the lighter sections to be right on the quote-unquote water's edge. And then I just do the same thing, working back over those same colors just to make sure that I have a good blend. And we are going to do more to the background, but for right now, we're just going to leave it there and we're going to move on to the stamping. Full disclosure, I stamped these in black. They are very detailed stamps. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful images. But I do have some regrets about stamping them in black because koi fish are typically like white and orange. But I was worried that if I heat embossed them, I would not be able to color them because there's so much detail. And so I could have stamped them in an orange color, and then kind of did like a no line look, but I didn't really trust myself. Oh, here, there's a dog hair on my stamp. So I have to get rid of that. It's a side effect of being a pet owner. And so I was like, you know what? I know that making them black is going to make them a little bit darker, but I'm willing to risk it. You'll have to tell me if you feel like the fish are too dark. I'm not sure how I feel about them being koi fish, but I do think that they're pretty fish at the end. So here I have all of these stamped, and I am going to start working on the koi fish. In another video, somebody had recently asked me why I thought I had stamped with a Copic Safe ink, as I did here. They had asked me why I thought my ink had smeared when I went to go color it. And for me, this typically happens for two reasons. One of them, which is the largest culprit, is I double stamp my images sometimes, and I may not always show it in the video just for time's sake, because like this video is almost 30 minutes long, and that's just to cover all the things we did. So sometimes I double stamp them and then I don't give them enough time to dry, or hit them with my heat tool to make sure that my ink has had enough time to dry and set before I go in there and start trying to color. The second reason, and I think this is a one that a lot of people don't realize when their ink is smearing, is that my marker is dry. And if my marker is dry, I'm continually going over the same portion of the image, almost like scrubbing it to try to get some pigment down that's solid, when really I just need to refill my marker, and it would solve my problem of it smearing. So those are just two things of note when you're doing some coloring. Here, the way this fish is drawn, he's kind of turned in on himself, and so the darker edge would be where his body is turned. The highlight would be on the opposite side of his body, so that is how I am coloring him. I am doing my level best to make sure that I have a lot of color variation in these different color oranges, to show this variation in their fins and their tails. On their bodies, I like this one in particular because he doesn't have the scales drawn in there. I am trying to make sure that I have a more of a smooth blend, but for the tails and the fins, I am trying to make sure that I have a lot of color variation because that's going to help us create that movement that I was talking about earlier. When you're doing copic coloring, any points that two items meet, so where their fin meets their body, or where one object lays on top of each other. So in this case, for this fish, his fins are directly on top of his body. That is where your shading is going to go. Try when you're coloring to keep your highlights as much as you can, because the highlights and the shadows is what gives your coloring dimension. So if you keep your darkest colors into those crevices and your lightest colors on your edges, you should have a pretty good recipe for dimension, which I think is when people are unhappy with their copic coloring, the majority of what they're missing when they look at their image is that dimension. So this is a long video. I am going to try to wrap up story time for this hospital stay. If you have missed part 1 or 2, I will link them below as well. Just so that way you're not coming into it like what's happening. So when we left off last time, Caitlin had been home. She was not eating well. We were having to feed her with a syringe to keep her hydrated. And so Sunday, things change. Sunday, she vomits when Eric tries to give her Dimetap, but it's not like regular vomit, it's like mucus. And it was right after one of her breathing treatments. So we were like, okay, it's breaking up. She's starting to, kind of be able to spit it up. And then it happened again. Where she was vomiting and it was more milk. This happened a total of 4 times on Sunday, which then prompted me to call the pediatrician's office on call because it's the weekend. And all I really wanted to know was, am I being over paranoid with her hydration? Do I need to back off the syringe feeding and just kind of let me know when she's hungry? I was very scared she was going to get dehydrated. And so I call the on-call. They said, we're kind of busy right now. If nobody calls you back in 35 minutes, call back. So I waited 40 minutes and I called back. And the nurse on the phone, it was a very nice lady, but they have to do an assessment. So they're asking me all these questions, is she crying tears? Is her mouth moist? And one of the things that they wanted to do was check her breathing. So basically, my understanding after talking to all of these doctors is a infant for her age should not be breathing more than 50 breaths per minute. If they're breathing more than 50 breaths per minute, they're in respiratory distress. So she has me do her breathing count, and the first one is 50 the first one was 52. So she has me do it again, and it's 50 on the dot. And so she's like, I'm going to have you basically load her up with breathing treatments. Apparently this is something common that they do in the emergency room or doctor's office just to kind of help reset her breathing. And so her typical breathing treatments were every 4 hours. She told me we had just done one an hour prior. So she said, do one now, wait 20 minutes and do another one. So, and she's like, and then I'll call you back to check on you. Okay. So in the meantime, we're doing this. She then calls me back and basically says, hey, listen, I talked to the pediatrician and he says you should take her in to be seen. Just, as a precaution. And so Eric and I talk about it. And since she is right on the cusp, we're like, okay, we're just kind of gonna, do the breathing treatments like she told us originally, and we're gonna wait and see. Unfortunately, for myself, I had to work that night. As you guys know, I'm working full-time from home, doing the card making. I am working part-time out of the house as a dispatcher still. Okay, back to the card. So here I chose some like corally reds for my lotus flowers because I thought that those would be really pretty. And I'm going to be honest with you, I did not like them. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of that coloring, and then I'm going to show you how I changed it without stamping a new image. This may not always work depending upon what colors you're using. Like if I had been coloring this flower green, this trick will not work. But because they were close, they were analogous colors, which means they're next to each other on the color wheel, I was able to make it change, have it not look strange, and not have to restamp my image. So this is something, it's called color glazing, that you can do to change the tone of your image. So let's say I colored this flower, it's too red, I don't like it, and I want it to be more pink. So I'm starting with a lighter color because I want to do the lightest color that I can. So I picked an RVO2 and I'm just going to cover the entire flower with this RVO2. Does it make it look more pink? Yes, it does, but not pink enough for me. It was still a little too red. So then I went up a color. So I went from an RVO2 to an RVO4. This one, I was much happier with the color, the brightness, the saturation I was getting. But in doing this, I wiped out all of the dimension that I had created with the red. There's almost no dimension and it looks just like a flat colored image. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to recolor this flower. And I'm going to do it with these RVs. Here I'm just checking to make sure that I like the color with the color palette I have going on. And then I'm going to pull out these RV markers. This is a normal array of colors I would use. Because this color is already darker, this flower is already darker, I am going to bring in one slightly darker color just to make sure that I really have a pop in those shadows that's going to give me my dimension. I'm not going to use that V99 for any of the other flowers that I color. I will stick to my usual go-to, the RV02 or 04, 09, and 69. But for this flower, because it basically doesn't even have any RVO2 in it, it's just too dark for that. I am going to just go one shade darker in my shadows. Speaking of the RVO2, I am going to use it, and you'll see here, I am going to use it to go in on the tips and remove a little bit of color. Copics are transparent, and so because of that, the lighter colors that have maybe more solvent in it, more colorless blender, will lift up the darker colors and make them a little bit lighter. And then I will show you one lotus flower that I color the regular way with this color combination where it's not a I had to fix it situation. And you'll see by the end of the card, they look pretty similar to each other. So this is on Sunday. I have to go to work. I was really torn about whether to go, but I had already called off like the last 2 times I was scheduled because we had COVID. And then it was what it was. Like, I didn't feel like I could call off. Eric was going to be home. And so his mom, my mother-in-law, wonderfully came out to spend the night, Sunday night. So that way, if Eric needed help with her being sick in the middle of the night, she would be here. Thank God. So I'm at work. Eric starts texting me at probably about 2:00 in the morning that she's awake and that she has a fever of 102 and she seems to be having some difficulty breathing. He sent me a video, and in the video, Caitlin's breathing, she's like humming with every breath. So when she's breathing, it sounds like which is apparently a large indicator that your child is in respiratory distress. So he tries to give her Tylenol for her fever, and she vomits it up. So once he tells me that, I'm like, okay, we have to take her in. If we have no way to keep her fever down, and she's clearly, seems like she's having trouble breathing, like we're going to have to take her. So we didn't even have enough people at work. I was like, I'm leaving. Send out a page like for somebody to come in because I'm out. Like I have to go. So I left work. I think at 3:30, like by the time all this transpired, the Tylenol, she had been up, wouldn't eat, all that jazz. So I left work at 3:30. Thank God I only work like 10 minutes from my house. So by the time I got home, Eric had her packed up. His mother was here already, so she could get Nathan in the morning when he came home from his dad's house. And so I asked Eric, I said, do you think we need to call an ambulance? And he was like, no, I don't think so. Like the pediatric unit, because we just skipped that main hospital again. We went directly to a different hospital that they were going to transfer us to the previous Thursday because they did have a pediatric unit. So we just drove straight there. It's 20 minutes away. He was like, by the time we call an ambulance and, wait for them to get here, like she won't even be at the hospital in 20 minutes. So we made the choice that we were just going to drive her, which we did. And you know how they tell you don't panic unless you see your nursing staff, like how fast they're moving? I cannot even tell you how fast that these people were moving, and they were amazing, and I am forever grateful for the things that they did for my child that I could not do. All right, it's a good thing we have to go back to the card because I'm starting to get a little emotional. So, here, all of the coloring is done. One of the other things that I'm going to do to create some movement is I'm going to use this white gel pen to my benefit. So I'm going to use it to highlight the little scales on their body by using little dots. And then I'm also I'm not going to draw full thick lines. I'm going to drag the pen across their fins so it creates skipped lines of white, which will create varying highlights. And this is going to give these little fish so much more movement. I'm also going to use the white gel pen to add some detail to the lotus flowers just because I thought it was pretty. Totally not necessary. And then I'm going to use the shimmer and the stardust stickles on the fish as well. The shimmer, I'm going to cover the whole thing. The stardust stickles, I'm going to do the same skipping lines that I do with the white gel pen. So we get to the emergency room. I walk in. I said my 7-month-old daughter is having difficulty breathing and she has a fever of 102. Eric is getting her out. The lady at literally is like, I just need a driver's license. I hand her mine. And by the time I am like turned around to help Eric get her out of her car seat, there is already an emergency room nurse who is in the lobby stripping my daughter's clothes off. Like they were not messing around. So we get her back into the ER room. They're putting, I might need a minute. Okay, I think I got myself together. So they give her oxygen. Eric holds her while they put an IV in her little teeny tiny arm, because she needs fluids. They give her Motrin to bring down her fever. Like, I basically just stood in the ER and cried because there wasn't anything that I could do to help her. And while I am extremely grateful for the staff that was able to help her, I just felt so helpless as her mother. And it was the single most terrifying experience of my parenting journey. It was awful. But once they got some oxygen on her, once she had like the full saline bag, like she was playing and curious and making her little piggy noises. And, if you watch my Instagram, I shared that video there, where, she's got this giant IV in her arm because she's just so tiny. And they were so thorough. They checked for everything. They retested her for all of the same things. And this time she came back positive for RSV. RSV is I'm going to mess up the pronunciation. It's respiratory syncovial. Basically, it's a respiratory disease and it's so common. And they even told us later on, like if she had been 3 years old, you wouldn't be in the situation, but it can be deadly to infants because they cannot fight it off. In fact, when my goddaughter was born, she was born at 30 weeks. She was very premature. And even after her due date, when my best friend brought her home, they told her not to take her out because it was RSV season. And they told her if she gets RSV, it'll kill her. Like, it's that bad. And Nathan never had it when he was a baby, because he didn't go to daycare. So he was only ever exposed to just us and my parents. So he never had it. I had no idea that it was this dangerous to infants, and just, I mean, it was terrible. It was so awful. So they check to make sure she doesn't have any secondary, because a lot of times when kids get a viral infection, sometimes they present with an ear infection or a urinary tract infection. They checked all of those things. She did well being catheterized. I held her for that. She did pretty well. And in typical Caitlin fashion, doing whatever she wants, they are trying to catheterize her, and she decides she's just going to start peeing all over the bed. So really, by the time that they admitted us, which was at, I think 9 a.m., she was feeling much better. The way that the pediatrician explained it to us, was that, like, you know, they don't feel well, so they don't eat, so they get dehydrated, so they don't feel well, so they don't eat. And like sometimes they just need a little extra push to help make them feel better. So they did admit us. We were in the hospital until Tuesday. No, yes, Tuesday afternoon we came home. And so she was general keeping good oxygen levels. We did also, when we brought her home from the emergency room on Thursday, we went and bought one of those owlet socks, which does track their pulse ox. So when she had her little sock on, we're able to see what that is. Here is the indication of how bad RSV is. If a child has RSV, they are okay, or an acceptable amount of oxygen that the child is getting is 92 while they're awake, and it can go down to 90 while they're sleeping. Like, clearly having a lot of trouble breathing. There is a little bit more to this story, but please know that she is home, she is doing well, she is recovering. So there may be a little something here or there to talk about, but that's basically the whole hospital stay story. And that is the end of the card. So this is the whole card. I hope you learned a little bit of something. I do appreciate your time. Like I said, they are having a sale through the 4th of July, so I will link that below if you're interested. And I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.